The wind found the holes in her coat. It was not a coat for mountains, nor for the Wyoming winter. It was a thin, gray thing, worn past threadbare, belonging to a woman who was supposed to stay indoors. Clara did not stay indoors. She ran. She ran with a split lip that tasted of iron and a ringing in her ear where her Uncle Silas had struck her. The blow had been meant to knock her to the floor. It had. But when he had turned to fetch the rope, to tie her until the rancher Grissom arrived, she had scrambled up. She had not grabbed a gun. Silas kept the rifle locked, and the pistol was on his hip. She had not grabbed provisions, save for the half-loaf of stale bread on the counter. Hard as a shingle, she had grabbed that and the small, dull knife she used for peeling potatoes, and she had run. Now, hours later, the homestead was gone, swallowed by the white fury of the storm. There was no trail. There was only the driving snow, which felt like needles against the raw skin of her face, and the awful, biting cold that had sunk past her skin and into her bones. Her shoes were thin leather, meant for a kitchen floor. They were soaked through. She had tried to wrap them in burlap sacking she'd found snagged on a barbed wire fence marking the edge of her uncle's useless property. But the burlap was frozen stiff and offered no warmth. Every step was a fresh agony. Her feet had stopped feeling like feet an hour ago. They were just heavy, painful stones she had to lift and drop. She fell for the fourth time, or maybe the fifth. She lost count. This time, she did not get up right away. She lay in the drift, the snow piling on her back, and a terrible, tempting warmth began to creep into her limbs. It would be easy to stop. It would be so easy to close her eyes and let the white dark take her. A voice, her uncle's voice, echoed in her head. Useless. Good for nothing but feeding the pigs and warming a man's bed. And you can't even do that right. She had been a burden since she arrived. 10 years old, after the mine collapse took her father and her mother wasted away from the grief of it. Silas, her mother's brother, had taken her in not from kindness, but from duty, and he had never let her forget the cost of her daily bread. Now, Grissom, a man with piggish eyes and a wet mouth, who had looked at her like she was a side of beef he was inspecting. Silas owed him money. Clara was the payment. The thought of Grissom's hands, of his whiskey breath, was colder than the snow. Clara pushed herself up. She used the dull knife to stab into the frozen crust of the snowbank and hauled her body forward. She could not feel her hands. She could not feel her feet. But she could feel the deep, throbbing ache in her ribs from where Silas had kicked her 2 days prior. The pain was her anchor. It reminded her she was alive, and that she had to keep moving. She ate a piece of the bread. It was like chewing ice and sawdust. It tore at her raw throat. But it was something. She kept walking, staggering into the wind, her body bent nearly in half. She was not running toward anything. There was no town for 50 miles, and even if there were, no one would help her. She was Silas's kin, and by law. She was his to manage until he married her off. She was simply running from. She was running until she could run no more, and then she would die. It was a terrible, small freedom, but it was the only one she had ever known. She hated herself for her weakness, for not being strong enough to fight him, for not being smart enough to plan. She hated herself for being a woman, a thing to be bartered and broken. She hated the world for making her this way. The light began to fail, the gray sky turning a deep, bruised purple. The wind howled, a living thing that wanted to peel the flesh from her bones. She stumbled over a rise and fell again, this time down a short, steep incline. She landed hard against something that was not snow. It was a log, half buried, a deadfall. She tried to rise, but her legs would not obey. The warmth was back, stronger this time, filling her chest. She knew what it meant. This was the end. She rolled onto her stomach, burying her face in the crook of her arm, and let the storm take her. Eli Boone checked the last of his trap line with the methodical patience of a man who lives by the season. The storm was bad. Worse than he'd expected for this early in winter. It was a mean, scouring wind, and it meant the high passes would be shut tight by morning. He'd caught 2 rabbits and a marten. Enough. He reset the traps, his movements economical, his hands covered in thick buckskin, never fumbling. His gaze swept the snow-covered ground, reading the story it told. A fox had passed this way, a wolf pack, high on the ridge, their tracks already filling. And then, something else. It was not an animal. It was a heap of rags, almost completely buried, near the deadfall trap he'd planned to reset. He approached it slowly, his rifle resting easy in his arm. He had seen strange things in the mountains. He had seen men frozen solid, their faces masks of surprise. He nudged the shape with his boot. It was small, too small for a man. He knelt, pulling his glove off. He brushed the snow from the back of the figure, a tangle of dark, frozen hair. He hooked his fingers under the shoulder and rolled the body over. It was a girl, a woman. Her face was blue-white, her lips cracked and bloody. Ice clung to her eyelashes. He put his bare, calloused fingers to her neck, pressing against the frozen skin. He felt nothing. He cursed, low and soft. He was about to pull his hand away when he felt it, a flutter, a beat so faint it was more imagined than real, like the wing of a trapped bird. She was alive. He did not pause to wonder who she was or how she had come to be in this God-forsaken place, miles from any homestead, miles from anything. Wondering was a luxury. Survival was not. He holstered his rifle, wrapped her in the oilcloth tarp he carried, and lifted her. She weighed nothing. He slung her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, his bad leg protesting the sudden weight, and began the 2-mile climb back to his cabin. Clara woke to 2 sensations, fire and fear. The fear came first. It was a hot, metallic taste in her mouth. She was not in the snow. She was inside. The air was warm and smelled of wood smoke, pine, and cured meat. Her eyes snapped open. The light was dim, coming from a stone hearth where a low fire crackled. She was on a cot, covered by a heavy buffalo hide. She tried to sit up, and a violent pain shot through her chest, stealing her breath. She fell back, gasping. "Easy." The voice was not Silas. It was deep, rough, like gravel rolling in a creek bed. A man emerged from the shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in buckskins. He had a beard, dark and full, and his hair was long, tied back with a leather thong. He looked less like a man and more like a piece of the mountain itself. He walked with a limp, favoring his left leg. Clara scrambled backward on the cot, her hands flying up to protect her face, the movement pulling at her frozen skin. She hit the rough-hewn log wall of the cabin and could go no further. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow. It did not come. She opened one eye. He had stopped, maybe 10 feet away. He was holding a tin cup. "You're safe," he said. The words were flat. A statement, not a comfort. She stared at him, her heart hammering so hard it hurt her bruised ribs. She did not speak. She did not know if she could. Her throat felt raw, her tongue thick. "You were mostly frozen," he said, still not moving closer. "Near my trap line. I brought you here." She watched his hands. They were large, scarred. One of them, his left, was missing 2 fingers at the knuckle. But they were still. They were not raised. "Here." He set the cup on a small, crude stool near the cot, then backed away, returning to the shadows by the fire. "Broth. It's hot." She watched him. He sat on a stump that served as a chair, picked up a piece of leather, and began to work it with a tool. He did not look at her again. He just sat, the picture of patience, the only sounds the scrape of his tool and the pop of the fire. The cabin was small. 1 room. It was built like a fort. The walls were thick logs, chinked tight. The single window was small, covered by a stretched piece of oiled hide. Not glass, The door was a heavy slab of wood with a thick iron bar leaning against the frame, ready to be dropped. This man was not afraid of the cold. He was afraid of something else. Or perhaps he just wanted to be left alone. Clara looked at the cup. Steam rose from it. She had not had anything but snow and hard bread in 2 days, but to take it was to accept something, to be in debt. "I want nothing from you," the man said, as if reading her thoughts. He still did not look up from his work. "You heal, then you leave. Simple as that." Her stomach cramped, a violent reminder of her hunger. Slowly, her body betraying her will, she reached for the cup. Her hands were wrapped in clean rags, but they were clumsy, swollen, and stinging. She managed to get the cup to her lips. The broth was thin, salty, and hot. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. It burned a trail down to her stomach, and for a moment, the warmth from the inside out was so overwhelming she thought she might weep. She did not. Weeping was a weakness Silas punished. She drank it all, her hands shaking. She looked at the man. He was still working. He had not watched her. "What is your name?" she whispered. Her voice was a dry croak. He paused his work. "Eli Boone." She waited. He did not ask for hers. He did not ask where she came from or why she was half dead in a blizzard. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind howling outside the thick walls. The sound was different from inside, muffled, safe. She slid off the cot. The floor was packed earth, cold under her bandaged feet. The buffalo hide was heavy. "The cot is fine," Eli said, his voice mild. Clara shook her head. She walked to the darkest corner of the cabin, away from the fire, away from him, near the wood pile. She pulled the heavy hide with her and wrapped it around her body, curling into a tight ball on the floor. It was what she deserved. It was what she understood. Eli Boone watched her. He saw the faded yellow and purple bruise that covered the side of her face, the way her arm curled around her ribs. He saw the terror in her, a thing so deep it had frozen her solid, just like the cold. He sighed, a quiet breath. He got up, his bad leg dragging slightly. She flinched as his shadow fell over her, but he did not stop. He walked past her, to the cot. He picked up the thin, straw-stuffed pillow. He tossed it onto the floor near her head. Then he went back to his stump, sat down, and returned to his work. Clara did not touch the pillow, but she watched him, through the slits of her eyes, until the exhaustion finally claimed her. The next few days passed in a haze of silence and snow. The storm did not let up. It buried the cabin up to the small window, plunging the room into a perpetual twilight. Clara did not move from her corner unless she had to use the chamber pot, hidden behind a simple screen. Eli never spoke to her, but he left food on the stool. A piece of smoked meat, a small roasted potato. She refused it. She would not be a burden. She would not owe him. On the third day, Eli stood, pulled on his heavy coat, and picked up his shovel. "I'm clearing the door. Stay inside." He unbarred the heavy door and pushed. It took his full weight to move it against the drift. A wall of white and a blast of Arctic air filled the room. For an hour, he worked, digging a trench out from the door. His movements rhythmic, powerful. Clara watched him. She had never seen a man work like this. Silas worked with his mouth, ordering, cursing. He swung his fists or a belt, but he did not swing an axe unless he had to. This man, Eli, seemed to be in a constant, quiet battle with the wilderness, and he seemed to be winning. The cold in the cabin became severe. Clara, in her corner, began to shake, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Eli finished, came back inside, and barred the door. The silence of the cabin returned. He looked at her, shaking in her pile of hides. He looked at the food on the stool, untouched. He walked over, his expression unreadable. Clara pressed herself against the logs. He did not reach for her. He picked up the cold potato. "You eat," he said. It was not a request. "Or you die. If you're going to die, do it outside. I won't bury you till spring." The words were blunt, almost cruel, but they were not angry. They were practical. He was stating a fact. She stared at him, trembling. "You think you're sparing me?" he asked, his voice low. "You think you're not a burden? A body is a burden. A live woman is just a woman. Eat." He tossed the potato into her lap. It landed softly on the hide. He went back to the fire. Clara looked at the potato. Her stomach roared. He was right. She was a coward. She was dying of shame in this man's cabin, and he was only offering her life. With fumbling, raw fingers, she picked up the potato and ate it. It was cold, waxy, and tasteless, but it was food. That night, she moved closer to the fire. She did not take the cot, but she slept on the hearthstones, where the residual warmth seeped into her bones. When she woke, it was dark. The fire was embers. The wind was screaming, a high-pitched shriek that sounded like a woman in pain. Clara sat bolt upright. A cry caught in her throat. She was not in the cabin. She was back at the homestead. Silas was standing over her, his shadow huge in the lamplight. Her mother was crying, a faint, ghostly sound. No, her mother was dead. She died when Clara was 8, her lungs filling with fluid, her hands thin as bird claws. Then it was her father, his face covered in soot, smiling at her from the mouth of the mine. "Be a good girl, Clara Bug," he'd said. Then the rumble, the shouting, the dark. "No," she whimpered, rocking back and forth on the hearth. "No, please, no!" She was small, useless, a burden. She was the reason her father went into the mine that day, to get extra pay for her birthday shoes. She was the reason her mother gave up. She was the reason Silas was so angry all the time. It was her. It was always her. "You're dreamin'." Eli's voice cut through the nightmare. She gasped, her eyes flying open. The fire was low. He was sitting on his stump, feeding small pieces of kindling into the embers. He hadn't been sleeping. "It's just the wind," he said. He did not look at her. He kept his attention on the fire. Clara wrapped her arms around her knees, pulling them tight to her chest. Her body was slick with a cold sweat. She was shaking again, but not from the cold. "I can't," she whispered. "Can't what?" "I can't stay here. I'm no good." The confession tore from her, ripped from a place so deep she didn't know it existed. He was right. I'm broken. I'm useless. Eli stopped feeding the fire. He looked at the flames, his scarred hand resting on his knee. The cabin was quiet, save for the howling wind and her own ragged breathing. "Ain't no such thing as a broken person," he said, his voice quiet. "Just folks who have been bent hard. Bent don't mean broke." She shook her head, tears finally coming. Hot and fast, they froze on her cheeks. "You don't understand. He wanted to, and before him, I don't know how to be, how to—" She choked on the words. She didn't know how to be anything but afraid. She didn't know how to accept a kindness that didn't come with a price. She didn't know how to be looked at without feeling like property. She curled tighter, burying her face in her knees. The blizzard raged outside, a mirror of the storm inside her. She whispered the words into the folds of her own clothing. A final, terrible admission. So quiet she barely heard it herself. "I don't know how to be loved." The silence stretched. Eli did not move. He did not rush to comfort her. He did not offer platitudes. He just sat by the fire, a solid, unmovable shape in the dark. When he finally spoke, his voice was as steady and as rough as the stones of the hearth. He did not look up from the flames. His words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. "Then let me show you how." Clara did not know what to say to that. No one had ever offered her anything but a command or a threat. This felt like a promise, but it was spoken so plainly, without warmth, that it confused her. She pulled the buffalo hide tighter, her tears drying cold on her face. Eli did not press. He turned back to the fire, and the long, howling night resumed its hold. When morning came, gray and smothered by the continuing storm, Clara awoke with a hot, sharp shame. She had wept in front of him. She had spoken of things a woman does not speak of. She expected him to be different, to look at her with pity, or worse, with the veiled contempt Silas always showed after one of her spells. But Eli was exactly the same. He was cleaning his rifle, the pieces laid out on an oiled cloth. He nodded at her, a simple acknowledgement that she was awake. "There's coffee in the pot," he said, "and biscuits in the skillet." She rose stiffly from the hearth. Her corner felt childish now. She walked to the fire, poured a tin cup of the bitter, black liquid, and took a biscuit. It was hard, but warm. She ate, forcing it down. She had to be useful. She could not be a burden. Not after last night. She looked around the cabin. It was tidy, the way a man's space is tidy, functional, bare. His bedroll was tight in the corner. His traps hung by the door. A pile of pelts was stacked neatly, but the floor was tracked with mud and snow, and the pot from last night's stew was sitting near the hearth. She picked it up. She found the lye soap and a rough cloth. She went to the door, scooped snow into the pot, and began to scrub. Eli watched her for a moment, his hands still. She kept her head down, her knuckles raw against the iron. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said, her voice small. "I want to—" He accepted this. He went back to his rifle. When she was done, she set the pot by the fire to dry. She took the small broom he'd made from birch twigs and began to sweep the packed earth floor. She organized his meager supplies, flour, salt, beans, coffee, into a neater line on the crude shelf. She worked with a quiet competence, a lifetime of thankless chores built into her muscles. Eli let her. He gave her the space to work, and in doing so, he gave her something she had not realized she'd lost, a purpose. She was not a guest to be pitied. She was not a prisoner to be fed. She was a person, sharing a space. Later that day, while she was kneading a new batch of dough, using her own judgment on the flour and water, she spoke to his back. He was mending a snowshoe. He owed money, she said. Eli's hands paused. "My uncle Silas. He owed a man named Grissom, a rancher from the low country. He drank. He gambled. He owed Grissom near $200. She did not need to look at Eli to know he was listening. The cabin was utterly still, save for the wind. "Grissom, he came by last month. He looked at me. He told Silas he would forget the debt." She stopped, her hands frozen in the dough. "I was the payment. Silas was going to make me marry him. That night, Grissom was coming back with a preacher he'd paid." She swallowed, the memory thick and foul in her throat. "That's when I ran. I'd rather freeze than that." Eli set the snowshoe down. He turned, slowly. He looked at the bruises on her face, which were fading now from purple to a sickly yellow. He looked at her, a small, fierce thing covered in flour. "Some men," Eli said, his voice a low rumble, "ain't fit to live among folks. They're just wolves in men's clothing." He said nothing more about it, but when he handed her a cup of water, his hand was steady, and his eyes held no judgment, only a deep, cold understanding. The next day, the storm broke, and the world was a blinding, clean white. Eli took his rifle. "Check in the traps. Don't leave the cabin. The drifts are deep, and there are wolves." She nodded, watching him strap on his snowshoes. She found herself studying his left hand, the one missing 2 fingers. Before he could pull his glove on, she spoke. "Your hand, does it pain you?" He flexed the scarred knuckles. Only when the cold gets deep. Like this. Was it the war? She asked. Bold. He paused, his hand halfway into the glove. In a manner of speaking, I was a scout, for the Union, good at moving quiet, seeing what others missed. He pulled the glove on, his voice flat, reciting a story he had clearly locked away. There was another scout, a man I'd shared hardtack with for 2 years. We were watching a payroll shipment. Gold. He got greedy, decided that gold was worth more than his oath. He tried to stop you? He tried to kill me, Eli corrected. Figured I'd tell. He shot me in the side, used his knife on my hand when I tried to draw, left me for dead in a gully. Eli tapped his thigh. This leg, too, it never healed right. But you lived. I lived, he agreed. He picked up his rifle. And I learned that trust is a heavy thing. Most folks ain't strong enough to carry it. That's why I'm here. The mountains, they're honest. They'll kill you, but they don't lie about it. He left. Clara watched the door close, the heavy bar dropping into place. She and Eli, they were two sides of the same coin, both betrayed by men they should have been able to trust, both scarred, both hiding. Their bond built on that shared silence. It was forged in the simple routines of survival. They fell into a rhythm. He would chop the wood, his axe strokes echoing in the cold. Clear air. She would haul it, stack it. He would check the traps. Returning with rabbits or a grouse, she would skin them, her hands shaking the first time, steady the next, and make a stew that filled the small cabin with a rich, warm smell. She patched his clothes. His shirts were worn thin, and she mended them with careful, small stitches, her mother's lessons coming back to her. He watched her one evening, his eyes tracing the movement of her needle. One night, the wind picked up again, and the cold was bitter. Eli pulled a heavy, weather-beaten book from a small chest. Its cover was worn smooth, a Bible. He opened it, his rough finger finding a place. He was not a preacher. He read with a flat, quiet voice, not like a man reading the Word of God, but like a man reading a letter from an old friend. He read from the Psalms. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. From whence cometh my help? My mother taught me my letters from this, he said, closing the book. My mother loved books, Clara whispered. She had 3. She read them until the pages fell out. After she died, Silas burned them. He said they gave women ideas. Eli looked at her. He was right to be scared. They do. That night, the dream came back. It was always the same. Grissom's wet mouth, his piggy eyes, Silas holding her down, the smell of whiskey and unwashed wool. She woke up, her own voice ripping her from the dark. She was screaming. She was bolt upright on the cot. She had taken it, finally. After he insisted the hearth was too cold, and she was shaking, slick with sweat. Eli was there. He was not on his stump. He was standing beside the cot, a dark, solid shadow. He had his pistol in his hand, but it was pointed at the floor. He had moved so fast. He'd been ready to fight whatever was attacking her. He saw the terror in her eyes, saw it was not the cabin, but her mind. He slowly, deliberately, put the pistol back in the holster hanging from the wall peg. He did not touch her. He did not loom. He just stood, a guardian. You're here, girl, he said, his voice rough with sleep. You're safe. It's just the cabin, just the wind. She dissolved, covering her face, the sobs tearing out of her. They were ugly, painful sounds. I'm sorry, she gasped, rocking back and forth. I'm sorry, I woke you. I'm sorry, I keep. He sat on his stump, a few feet away. He did not shush her. He did not tell her it was all right. He just sat, a silent witness, letting her break. He waited until the sobs quieted into ragged, hitching breaths. Don't be sorry for surviving, he said into the darkness. he did not go back to his bedroll. He sat on that stump and watched the fire, keeping vigil until her breathing evened out and she fell back into an exhausted, dreamless sleep. The nightmare opened a new door. They talked more. The silences were still long, but they were comfortable now, not strained. They talked about the world down below. "Silas, he always said I was his property," Clara said one afternoon, her voice bitter. She was scrubbing the floor, the work giving her the courage to speak, like his horse or his land. He said the law backed him, that a wife or kin like me belonged to the man of the house. "The law is made by men in towns who ain't ever seen a real winter," Eli said. He was carving a piece of wood, making a new handle for his knife. "The law don't come up this high. Up here, there's just you and what you can do." He stopped carving. He looked at her, his gaze sharp. "What did you want before all this? If Silas and Grissom weren't there, what did you want to do?" The question stunned her. It hit her like a physical blow. She sat back on her heels, the wet rag dripping in her hand. She searched her mind. Want, it was a foreign word. There was only need to eat, need to stay warm, need to avoid a beating. "No one," she said, her voice trembling. "No one has ever asked what I wanted." She thought about it. The idea was a small, fragile seed. "I wanted to read those books. I wanted to see the ocean. I heard a trapper say it was a river so big you couldn't see the other side." She looked down at her red, chapped hands. "I wanted to not be afraid, just for one whole day, to wake up and not be afraid." Eli nodded slowly. "That sounds like a good day." Then the big snow came. The storm that had flirted with them for weeks finally arrived in full fury. It was not a flurry, but a solid, white wall that erased the world. For 5 days, they were trapped. The snow piled up past the window, plunging the cabin into a dim, constant twilight. The wind shrieked, a high, thin sound that vibrated in the logs. The cabin, which had felt like a shelter, became a cage. It was too small. The air grew thick, smelling of smoke, dried herbs. And the two of them, they moved around each other in a quiet, careful dance. Tension, of a different kind, began to build. It was in the way she handed him a tin plate, their fingers brushing. It was in the way he would look up from the fire and find her watching him. She studied his face, the lines carved by wind and sun, the gray that was starting to touch his beard, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. She was no longer seeing just a savior. She was seeing a man. He felt it, too. He became restless. He would get up and pace, 2 steps one way, 2 steps the other, his limp more pronounced. He would chop wood inside, on the hearth, just to have something to hit. When he caught her looking, he would turn away, his jaw tight. On the 5th night, the storm had finally quieted, leaving a deep, suffocating silence. The fire was low. Eli was cleaning his rifle again, more for something to do than for need. Clara was mending his shirt, the one he wore most often. She was holding it in her lap, the rough wool warm, smelling faintly of him, of wood smoke and pine. She finished the last stitch. She bit the thread. She stood and walked over to him. "It's done." He looked up. He set the rifle stock down and reached for the shirt. Their hands met. His fingers, rough and calloused, brushed her own, which were raw from lie and cold. She did not let go. She did not step back. She just stood there, her heart a heavy drum against her ribs. The air crackled. She could feel the heat coming off him, see the pulse beating in his neck. He looked at her, his eyes dark in the firelight. He understood what was happening, and he misunderstood it, all at the same time. He thought she was paying a debt. His voice was soft, so quiet it was almost lost to the fire. "You don't have to give me anything." He was giving her an out. He was telling her she was free. He was Silas's opposite. And because he told her she didn't have to, she knew, for the first time in her life, what it was to want. She made the choice. It was hers. She let go of the shirt and put her hand flat on his chest, on the place she had just mended. She felt his heart jump beneath her palm. She leaned in, clumsy, terrified, and sure. She kissed him. It was slow, unsure, her lips trembling against his. His beard was rough, and for a second, he was stiff, frozen in surprise. Then, his mouth softened. He kissed her back. It was gentle, a questioning. But as his hand came up, as his fingers brushed her hair, her body betrayed her. She flinched. It was a small, violent recoil, an instinct carved into her by years of pain. She didn't mean to, but she pulled back, her eyes wide with fear. Eli stopped, instantly. He did not get angry. He did not grab her. He pulled back, just enough to see her face. His hand, the one in her hair, froze. His eyes were dark, but all she saw in them was a deep, aching patience. "Only when you want it," he said, his voice thick. "Not a second before." He had passed the test. He had shown her. She stood there, breathing hard, looking at the man who had seen her broken and had not tried to possess the pieces. The tears came. They were not the hot tears of fear or the cold tears of despair. They were hot, sharp tears of relief, a dam breaking inside her that washed away years of filth. She cried, not because she was hurt, but because for the first time in her life, she was not. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the solid wall of his chest. He did not embrace her. He just stood there, unmoving, a mountain in the storm, and let her cry, his hand resting light and warm on the back of her head. The first sound of the thaw was water. It was a slow, steady dripping from the eaves, a sound that had been absent for so many months that Clara, waking on the cot, thought it was a leak. But it was not a leak. It was the world unfreezing. In the days that followed, the high drifts that had buried the cabin began to shrink, turning to heavy, wet slush. The snow receded from the south-facing slopes, revealing the packed brown mat of last year's grass. The air, which had been blade-sharp and dry, grew soft, heavy with the smell of damp earth and rotting pine. Eli changed with the season. The winter had been about holding on, about survival. The spring was about work. "The snow load's been heavy," he said one morning, staring up at the roof. "Likely cracked some of the sod." He did not ask her to help, but she followed him out. The sunlight was bright, almost painful, reflecting off the remaining snow. She squinted, her eyes watering, while he leaned a crude ladder against the cabin. She watched as he climbed, his bad leg stiff but sure. "I need the pitch bucket," he called down. She found it, a heavy pot of hardened pine resin. She heated it over the fire until it was a thick, black liquid, then carried it carefully out. He motioned for her to bring it up. She hesitated. The ladder was tall, the rungs slick. "Just keep your weight centered," he said, not unkindly. She climbed. When she reached the top, the world opened up. She could see the valley below, a deep, green-black gash in the white mountains. The wind was clean, and for a moment, she felt a dizzying sense of lightness. She held on to the roof edge, the heavy bucket in her other hand. "Good," he said. He took the bucket, and she sat on the roof beside him, watching as he expertly daubed the hot pitch into the seams of the sod bricks. They worked all day. She was his hands, fetching, holding, carrying. By the time the sun dipped, her muscles ached. But it was a good ache. It was the ache of work, not of injury. They settled into the rhythm of spring. The woodpile, which had been their fortress against the cold, was nearly gone. They spent 3 days felling dead pines. Eli showed her how to use the two-man saw. It was a rhythmic pull and push, a dance. He took the heavier side, his broad back flexing. Clara, at first, was clumsy, but she found the groove, her body moving with his. The smell of fresh sawdust filled the air. The trapping became more active. The animals were moving. Eli would come back with more than just rabbits. He brought grouse, and one day, a small deer. He laid a fat rabbit on the skinning block outside. "You'll need to know this." He handed her his sharpest knife, the one he kept honed like a razor. Clara looked at the dead animal. Its eyes were open, glassy. She thought of Silas, of the blood. Her stomach turned. "I can't," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Eli said, his voice flat. "There's no room for squeamishness up here. You eat, you work. This is part of it. It's just meat." He showed her where to make the first cut, around the ankles. He was practical, his movements clean. "Go on." She took the knife. Her hand trembled, but she thought of her uncle, of Grissom. She thought of being weak, of being useless. She set her jaw. She made the cut. It was awful. It was bloody, messy work, but she did it. She peeled the hide back, her fingers growing slick and warm. When she was done, she felt faint, but she also felt something else, a cold, hard competence. She had not enjoyed it, but she had not failed. Eli nodded, a small sign of approval. "Clean the knife." The next trial was the rifle. He set a small, empty bean can on a log 50 yards away. He handed her his rifle. It was a Henry, heavy and smelling of oil and powder. It was heavier than she could have imagined. She staggered under the weight. "Arrest it on the stump," he said. "Don't fight it." She propped the barrel. "It's not like a pistol. It'll kick. It'll kick hard. Settle it into your shoulder. Tight. Don't be afraid of it, or it'll hurt you." She did as he said, the brass crescent of the butt plate cold and hard against her collarbone. She squinted down the barrel, trying to line up the sights. "Breathe out," he said, his voice low, near her ear. "Breathe all the way out. Then squeeze. Don't pull the trigger. Just squeeze it slow." She held her breath. She squeezed. The explosion was deafening. It was a physical blow, a sudden, violent crack that slammed her shoulder back, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, a cry of shock escaping her. Her ear rang. The smell of sulfur filled her nose. "You closed your eyes," Eli said. He was not scolding, just observing. "It's loud," she said, her voice shaking. She was terrified of the noise, of the power. "It's supposed to be," he said. "Load it again." She fumbled with the cartridge, her fingers clumsy. She loaded it. She settled her shoulder, bracing herself this time. She breathed out. She squeezed. The blast, the kick. And this time, the tin can jumped off the log and spun through the air. Clara stared. She had done that. She, who had never held a weapon, had made that can fly. "See?" Eli said. "You just had to look." She lowered the rifle, her shoulder throbbing. She felt a strange, hot pride welling up, a feeling so unfamiliar it almost frightened her. "It was just luck," she murmured, turning away. "And it's too loud." Eli took the rifle from her, his calloused fingers brushing hers. He looked at her, his gaze steady. "You hit what you aimed at. You're allowed to be proud. Clara." Her name. He had never used her name before. It sounded strange in his deep voice. It sounded real. That night, the tension that had snapped during the blizzard returned. But it was different. It was not the anxiety of being trapped. It was the low, simmering heat of awareness. The cabin was warm. The small window was open. Just a crack, and the sound of the dripping thaw, of a distant owl, drifted in. She was mending her own dress, the one she'd been wearing when she fled. It was hopelessly torn, but she stitched it, needing to keep her hands busy. Eli was sitting on his stump, sharpening the axe head. The scrape of the whetstone was the only sound. She finished. She set the needle aside. She looked at him. He was bent over his work, the firelight catching the gray in his beard, the hard lines of his face. He was a good man. He was a quiet man. He had saved her, and he had asked for nothing. He looked up, as if he felt her gaze. He stopped his work. She stood. She walked the few feet that separated them. She did not know what she was doing, only that she had to do it. This was her choice. This was her, hitting what she aimed at. She knelt in front of him. He watched her, his hand still on the axe head. "Clara," he said, his voice low. A warning. She put her hand on his knee, over the rough denim. "You said you would show me," she whispered. His jaw tightened. He looked away from her, toward the fire. "I said that. I also said you don't owe me." "I know," she said. This isn't a debt." He searched her face, looking for fear, for coercion. He found only a raw, trembling honesty. He set the axe head down. Very slowly, he raised his hand, the one with the missing fingers, and touched her face, his thumb brushing the last fading bruise on her cheek. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch. That was all the answer he needed. He kissed her. It was not the hesitant, questioning kiss of the storm. It was deep, and it was sure. It tasted of coffee and wood smoke. It was a kiss that claimed nothing, but offered everything. He lifted her, his arms strong, and carried her the few steps to the cot. He laid her down, his body a warm, heavy shadow over hers, and then the old fear returned. Her body, separate from her mind, remembered. It remembered fists, and pain, and the suffocating weight of a man who took... She began to tremble. It started in her hands and spread to her legs. A violent, uncontrollable shaking. She hated it. She hated herself for it. "I'm sorry," she gasped, her eyes squeezing shut. I'm trying..." He stopped. He did not pull away, but he lifted his weight from her, resting on his elbows, his face close to hers. He waited. He just waited, letting her tremble, his presence a shield against the ghosts in the room. "Open your eyes," he whispered. She did. His were dark, patient. "This is me," he said. "Not him. This is here. This is now." He kissed her forehead, a gentle press of his lips. "You don't owe me softness. Clara, I'll wait for it." He was not demanding. He was not taking. He was offering. And in that moment, her fear did not vanish, but it loosened its grip. Her want for this man, for this connection, was greater than the terror of her past. She reached up, her shaking hand finding his beard. "Don't stop," she whispered. And he did not. It was tender. It was hesitant. It was, at times, clumsy, a language both of them were learning for the first time. She trembled the whole time, a leaf in a storm. But she did not stop him. She did not turn away. She met his touch with her own, her choice a silent, screaming thing in the quiet cabin. It was not the taking of a body. It was the meeting of two scars. Afterward, they lay in the dark. The fire was just red embers. Clara was curled against his side, his arm heavy and warm around her. She had never felt this. Safe, held. It was so foreign. It hurt. She was not crying, but the tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "It's all right," he murmured, thinking he had hurt her. "No," she whispered, her voice thick. She pressed her face into his chest, into the rough wool of his shirt. I feel wrong for wanting that." He was silent for a long time. He just held her, his hand rubbing slow circles on her back. "Why?" he finally asked. Because wanting, desire, it was always something ugly, something he stole. Silas, Grissom, it was something they took. I never knew it could be, asked for, or given." She took a shuddering breath. "It feels like a sin." Eli held her tighter. He thought of the men in the war, of the men in towns, of Silas and Grissom. He thought of the world that had bent this woman so hard. "It's not wrong to want," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. It's human. It's the most human thing there is. They're the ones who made it ugly, not you." She had no words for that. She just held on to him, breathing in his scent, and for the first time in her life, she believed it. A week passed. A new domesticity settled over them. It was unspoken. They were not husband and wife, but they moved as one. She woke before him, stirring the fire, putting the coffee on. He rose, his hand finding her shoulder in the dim light. A simple, grounding touch. She watched him carving one afternoon. His hands, which could be so strong, moving with delicate precision. She picked up a piece of scrap pine, using the small, dull knife she had escaped with. She began to carve. She was not skilled, but she was patient. She carved a small, rough shape, a bird, or perhaps a leaf. It was not clear, but it was hers. She gave it to him, her hand held out, her face averted in shyness. He took the small wooden charm. He studied it. He saw the work in it, the hours. He did not say it was beautiful. He did not say thank you. He stood, walked to the cabin door, and with a single, small nail, he hammered it into the wood, just above the latch. It was a mark, her mark, on his home. Their rhythm deepened. She tended to his wounds. She saw him favoring his bad leg after a long day of tracking, and she would heat water, mix it with the Epsom salts the trader had once brought. She would kneel and wash his foot, her hands gentle on the old, scarred tissue. He tended to hers. He saw the small, white scar on her wrist, a pale line from an old burn. He would lift her hand to his mouth and kiss it, his beard soft against her skin. They spoke in these small, quiet acts of care. One day, a shout echoed up from the trail. "Boone! You up there! Boone!" Eli stiffened. Clara, who was kneading bread, froze, her hands covered in flour. Eli grabbed his rifle. "Stay inside. Bar the door behind me." She watched through the small, oiled hide window. A man was leading a mule up the trail. He was thin, weathered, and wore a wide-brimmed hat. Eli met him 20 yards from the cabin, his rifle held easy in his arm. "Jed," Eli said, a simple greeting. "Boone." The trader. Jed nodded. "Just making my spring rounds. Got that tobacco you wanted, and shot. Heard you might need it." They bartered for a few minutes. Jed was talkative, hungry for conversation after weeks on the trail. Eli was terse, nodding, handing over a stack of marten pelts. "Town's busy." Jed chattered, packing the pelts. "Whole territory's jumpy. You heard about old Silas up on the ridge? The mean one. He's raising hell. Been in town twice, flashing money, asking about a runaway girl. His niece, he says, claims she stole from him." Clara's blood turned to ice. She dropped the wooden bowl. It hit the packed earth floor with a dull, heavy thud. Outside, Eli's body went rigid. "Is that so?" "Aye," Jed said, oblivious. "He's got a couple of hard men with him. A deputy from down south, too. I heard he's telling anyone who'll listen he's going to drag her back and see her horse whipped." Jed laughed. "Sounds like she was smart to run. Well, that's my news. Be back before the snow flies." Eli watched him lead the mule back down the trail until he disappeared. Clara was still standing by the window when he came back inside. She was white as a sheet, her hands frozen in the cooling dough. "You heard," he said. It was not a question. She nodded. A single, jerky movement. "He's coming." "He doesn't know you're here. That was just town talk." "He'll find me," she whispered. "He'll beat on people until someone talks. Someone always talks. He'll find me." The old panic was back, cold and sharp. She began to untie her apron. "I have to go. I have to leave. I can't. I won't have him find me here. I won't have him hurt you." She was grabbing her thin coat, the one she'd arrived in. Eli caught her arm. "Clara, stop!" "No, you don't understand him," she cried. pulling against him. He's not just a wolf. He's a monster. He will burn this place down just to get me. I know, Eli said, his voice calm, cutting through her panic. He held her arms, forcing her to look at him. So we leave. She stopped struggling. What? We leave. Tonight. We pack what we can carry. We head north, into Montana territory. I know the passes, it's rough country, but no one will find us. Not Silas, not anyone. He was offering to abandon his home, the cabin he had built with his own hands, the fortress he had hidden in for years. He was offering it up. For her. Clara looked at him. She looked at the hearth she had swept, the food she had cooked. She looked at the small, carved bird on the door. This was the first home she had ever had, the first place she had ever felt safe, the first place she had ever felt human. She thought of running, of a lifetime of looking over her shoulder, of being cold and hungry and afraid, forever. She shook her head, slowly. No, she said, her voice quiet, but hard as iron. I'm tired of running. Eli searched her face. He saw the fear, but underneath it, he saw the steel. He saw the woman who had fired his rifle, the woman who had faced her own ghosts in his bed. If we stay, he said, his voice grim, he will come, and it will be a fight. I know, she said. She pulled her arm from his grasp and walked back to the bread bowl. She began to knead the dough again, her movements sharp, angry. He's been asking about a runaway girl. She looked up, her eyes bright and cold. Let him come. He won't find a girl. He'll find a woman. A slow, grim smile touched Eli's lips. He nodded once. All right. He did not go back to his traps. He went to the heavy wooden bar by the door and checked its fit. He went to the small window and began to hammer a set of thick shutters he had built for the deep winter, fitting them on the inside. He took down his rifle and the spare. He checked his ammunition box. We'll need more water, he said. Clara took the buckets. They did not speak of escape. They spoke of sightlines. They stockpiled supplies. They were no longer hiding. They were preparing for war. The smoke was a thin, gray smudge against the sharp blue of the morning sky. It did not belong. Eli saw it first. He was splitting the last of the logs they had sawn, the rhythmic thunk of his axe, the only sound. Besides the high cry of a hawk, he stopped mid-swing, his head tilted. He stood motionless for a full minute, sniffing the air, his eyes fixed on the lower trail, miles below. What is it? Clara asked. She was outside, hanging a washed shirt on a line of cordage he had strung between two pines. Smoke, he said. His voice was flat, but the single word was heavier than the axe in his hand. Down on the switchback. Someone's camped. A trapper? She asked, her hand stilling on the damp cloth. No, he said. Wrong place. No water there, and no game. They camped fast, or they're careless. He drove the axe into the chopping block and strode into the cabin. He came back out with the small spyglass he'd taken off a dead cavalry officer at Antietam. He braced it against the doorframe, his bad legs set, and was silent for a long time. Clara watched his back. It was a wall of muscle, tensed. What do you see? She whispered. 3 men, he said, his voice low. And 3 horses. 1 man. He's thick, wears a black coat, even though it's warm. Clara's blood ran cold. She dropped the shirt into the mud. Silas, she breathed. He's passing a bottle, Eli continued, his eye still pressed to the glass. The other 2, they look like hired men, hard used. They all have rifles in their scabbards. He lowered the spyglass. The brass catching the sun. He looked at her, his face grim. They're not lost. They're resting the horses before the last climb. They'll be here by dusk. The world tilted. The clean, bright morning. The smell of pine. The good work she had been doing. It all vanished, replaced by a cold, numbing terror. It was not the vague fear of if, it was the hard certainty of when. Today. No, she said. It was a reflex. She began backing away toward the cabin, her hands fluttering. No, he can't, not here. Clara, Eli said, his voice sharp, cutting through her rising panic. I have to go, she said, her voice high. She scrambled into the cabin. He was wrong. She was wrong. They couldn't fight. This was his home. She was the one who had brought the trouble. She was the plague. Stop, he commanded. She ignored him. She grabbed the small sack she had arrived with, the one that held only her old, tattered dress. She grabbed the dull knife. She was running on pure, animal fear. He'll kill you, she cried, her voice breaking. He'll kill you because of me. I won't. She ran out the door, not toward the trail they had come up, but toward the steep northern slope, toward the dense timber. She would run, hide, lead them away. She would die in the woods, but she would not let this man die for her. She had only made it 20 yards, scrambling up the slick pine needle slope. When he caught her, his hand clamped around her arm, iron strong, and spun her around. Let me go, she shrieked, striking at his chest with her free hand. Let me go! He'll burn it! He'll burn everything! And where will you go? He yelled back, his voice a roar that shocked her into stillness. He shook her, once, hard. Where? Clara? Into the snow? Back to him? You think he won't find you? You think you'll last one night out here? It's better than you dying, she sobbed, the fight going out of her, replaced by a storm of desperate grief. I ain't dying, he said, his voice raw. He pulled her against him, his grip on her arm softening but not releasing. He was breathing hard. And you ain't leaving. She slumped against his chest, her fist still clenched, but all the strength gone from it. Eli, please, you don't know him. He's a monster. He'll... I've lived half a life alone. Clara, he said, his voice quiet now, rough with an emotion she had never heard from him. He put his other hand on the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. Hiding, trusting nothing. I'm not watching the rest of my life ride away on a horse because I was too afraid to fight for it. She looked up at him. His face was set, the lines around his eyes deep. He was not afraid. He was angry. He was offering her the one thing she had never had, a man who would stand between her and the dark. She broke. The terror and the love and the hope were too much. She wrapped her arms around his waist and sobbed, a deep, tearing sound that echoed in the quiet woods. She cried for her mother, for her father, for the broken, useless girl she had been. He held her. He just held her, his hand stroking her hair, his body a solid, warm wall. He let her cry until the sobs turned into shudders. All right, he said softly. After a long time. That's enough. We've got work to do. He let her go, and the woman who straightened up was not the girl who had run. Her eyes were red, her face was wet, but the panic was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. What do we do? She asked. They worked with a grim, focused energy. Eli barred the door and shuttered the window. The cabin was instantly plunged into near darkness, lit only by a single lantern and the low fire. There's a space, he said, kicking at a loose-fitting plank in the floor near the hearth. I dug it for a root cellar, but the ground was too rocky. It's not deep, but it's cover. He pried up the boards. A dark, shallow hole was revealed, smelling of earth and damp. It was maybe 3 feet deep, long enough for 2 people to lie in, side by side. If they get in, he said, or if they fire the roof, we go in here. The smoke will be less. It'll give us a chance. Next, he went to the woodpile. This is our best defense. He pointed to the thick stack of logs that stood shoulder high near the door. It's a wall. They can't shoot through it from the east. He began rolling a heavy water barrel against the weakest part of the cabin wall. We have 2 rifles, mine, and the spare. It's an old Springfield, slower to load, but it shoots true. He laid both rifles on the cot. He opened his ammunition box. "You'll load, I'll shoot." "No," Clara said. He looked up, surprised. "I can shoot," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I hit the can." "This ain't a can. Clara, this is a man. You shoot a man. You have to be ready to kill him." "He is ready to kill me," she said, her voice flat. "He's ready to kill you. Show me how." Eli looked at her for a long second. He saw the steel in her spine. He nodded. He picked up the spare rifle. "This ain't for scaring. You don't fire a warning. You don't aim for a leg. That's a good way to get us both killed. A wounded man can still shoot." He pressed the heavy rifle into her hands. "You aim center mass, right here." He tapped his own chest. "You aim to put him down. You squeeze the trigger. Just like I showed you. You breathe out. And you don't think about his face. You think about that spot. You think about this cabin. You think about breathing tomorrow. Can you do that?" She held the rifle. It was so heavy. The oil on the stock was slick in her sweating hands. She thought of Silas's face, of Grissom's wet mouth. She thought of the rabbit, the blood on her hands. This was just meat, mean, spoiled meat. "I can do that," she whispered. "Good." He showed her the weak spots in the cabin walls, small chinks between the logs that he had carved out, specifically for this firing ports. "You'll take the window shutter, I'll take the one by the door. We wait for my word, and we don't say nothing, no matter what they say." They set traps, not for killing, but for warning. Eli strung thin wires across the trail, attached to a stack of empty tin cans inside the shutter. "We'll hear them before we see them." He doused the fire until it was just hot coals, enough to keep the cabin from freezing, but not enough to cast light. Then they waited. The hours passed. The dim light from the chinks faded. Dusk came, and the world outside turned a deep, bruised purple. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Clara's heart beat so hard. She was sure Eli could hear it. She sat on the cot, the cold rifle across her lap, her knuckles white. Then a sound, a sharp clink, clink, clank from the wire by the window. Eli, who had been sitting as still as stone, raised his hand. He put his eye to the firing port. "They're here," he mouthed in the dark. Clara moved to her spot, her legs feeling like lead. She pressed her eye to the narrow slit in the shutter. She saw them, 3 dark shapes against the snow. They were on foot, having left their horses down the trail. They moved slowly, rifles held ready. One of them was Silas. Even in the gloom, she knew his bulk, the way he moved, like a bear. They stopped 30 yards from the cabin. "Boone!" a voice called. It was not Silas. It was rough, trying to sound official. "Eli Boone, we're lawmen. We're looking for a runaway girl, name of Clara Gable. We know she's in there. Send her out, and there'll be no trouble." Eli was silent. He was a shadow against the wall, his own rifle aimed. "Did you hear me? Boone!" the man shouted. "This is official county business. You're harboring a thief." Still, Eli was silent. Clara could hear them whispering. Then, Silas's voice, loud and full of rage. "She's in there! I can smell her! You send my niece out, Boone, or we're burning you out!" This was it. Clara's hands were so slick, she could barely hold the rifle. "Light the torch!" Silas roared. One of the men, a thin shadow, bent down. A match flared, and he touched it to a pine branch wrapped in an oily rag. The flame leaped up, casting a wild, dancing light. "This is your last chance," Silas bellowed. "Send her out!" The man with the torch stepped forward. He was holding a lantern in his other hand, a tin one, to light his way. He was the closest. "Now," Eli whispered. "Which one?" Clara's voice was a dry croak. "The light! Hit the lantern! Not the man! Just the lantern! Now!" Clara put her rifle in the slit. She couldn't see the man's chest. She could only see the light. She aimed for the bright, yellow square. She breathed out. She squeezed. The rifle exploded. The sound inside the cabin a deafening cannonade. The kick slammed her back, and she fell, the rifle clattering on the floor. But outside, the lantern exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. The man screamed, more in surprise than pain, and dropped the torch. It sputtered in the wet snow. "She's shooting!" one of the men yelled. "Get down!" In that second of confusion, Eli fired. His Henry rifle made a flatter crack than her Springfield. The man who had yelled, not Silas, the other hired man, grabbed his chest. He made a sound, a short oof, and fell backward. He did not move again. "He shot Frank!" the man with the burned hand screamed. He fired blindly at the cabin, his bullet thudding harmlessly into the woodpile. "Kill them!" Silas roared from the darkness. "Kill them both!" The man with the burned hand scrambled behind a tree, raised his rifle, and fired again. The bullet punched through the shutter, splintering the wood, passing exactly where Clara's head had been. She screamed, flat on the floor, covering her head. Eli fired again. A sharp cry. The man behind the tree slumped. Clara could hear him, a terrible, wet, choking sound. He was wounded. And then silence, a profound, ringing silence. Eli reloaded. He did not move from his port. Clara, trembling, crawled back to her feet. She looked through the slit. The torch was almost out. The man Eli had shot first was a dark lump. The second man was groaning, a low, animal sound. And Silas? He was gone. He had run. The second his men were down, the coward had turned and fled into the dark, leaving the man she had wounded to die. The groaning stopped. The silence returned. Eli did not move for an hour. He just waited, his rifle aimed at the dark. Clara, too, stayed at her port. The Springfield reloaded, her body numb. Finally, Eli lowered his rifle. "He's gone. The other two are dead." He lit the main lantern. The bright light was a shock. Clara looked at him. His face was granite. She looked at her hands. They were shaking so violently. She had to clench them into fists. She started. "I hit the lantern." "You did," he said. He walked over to her. He did not touch her. "You did good." He unbarred the door. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the metallic smell of gunpowder and blood. Eli stepped out, his rifle ready. He walked to the two bodies. He checked them. He came back, his face pale in the lantern light. "They're gone," he said. And then, from the trail, Silas's voice, full of venom, echoing in the night. He was far away, safe in the dark. "You can have her. Boone? She ain't nothing but a used-up whore. No man wants a used-up whore like you. You'll come back crawling to me, girl. You'll be begging." The words, aimed from the dark, hit Clara harder than the bullet that had missed her. They found the deepest, darkest place inside her, the place that still believed him. She slid down the cabin wall, her strength gone. The rifle fell from her lap. She had survived. They had won, but she was broken. She put her head in her hands, and the sobs that came were not of relief. They were of a deep, profound shame, a filth that she felt crawling all over her. Eli barred the door. He put his rifle away. He came to her, a dark, solid shape. He did not say the words were untrue. He did not say Silas was a liar. He just knelt in front of her. He took her shaking hands away from her face and held them. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and pulled her into his arms. He held her as she trembled, as the full, violent weight of the night crashed down on her. He held her head against his chest, his hand stroking her hair. She cried for hours, a long, low animal sound of pain. He held her through all of it. "He's wrong," he whispered, finally, into the dark, long after her sobs had quieted to shudders. "He's wrong, Clara." "He's not," she choked. I'm ruined." He pulled her back, just enough to see her face in the dying lantern light. "You listen to me," he said, his voice fierce, his scarred hand holding her chin. "He didn't make you. He hurt you. You're not what he made you. You're what you survived. You hear me? You survived him. You survived this night. You are not his. You are yours." He held her all night. She did not sleep. He did not sleep. They just sat on the floor, holding on, as the cabin grew cold and the blood froze on the porch outside. When the first gray light of dawn came, Eli stood. His body was stiff. He looked at Clara. She was pale, her eyes wide and bruised-looking, but the shaking had stopped. He went outside. He did not bring the bodies in. He dragged them, one by one, to a deep ravine 100 yards from the cabin and rolled them in. It was a cold, hard burial, but it was more than they deserved. He came back. He took his axe. He began to chop at the porch boards, the ones stained dark with Frank's blood. He chopped them out, the sound sharp and final in the cold morning. He piled them, and the splinters from the shutter, near the fire pit. Clara watched him. She stood, her body an aching column of pain. She walked to her small sack. She pulled out the thin, gray dress she had arrived in, the symbol of her old life, the dress of the girl Silas had beaten. She walked to the fire pit and laid it on top of the bloody wood. Eli came over. He looked at the dress. He looked at her. He said nothing. He struck a match and tossed it onto the pile. The wood, soaked in blood, was slow to catch, but the thin cotton of her dress flared up, bright and fast. A sudden, clean light. It turned to black ash in seconds. The board smoked, then caught, the fire purifying the wood, burning away the night. They stood side by side and watched it burn. When it was done, they went inside. Eli took down the shutters. He barred the door. He lay down on the cot and pulled her down beside him. He did not try to kiss her. He did not try to hold her in passion. He just wrapped his arms around her, pulling the heavy buffalo hide over them both. They said nothing. They did not speak of the fight. They did not speak of Silas. They did not speak of the dead. For 2 days, they barely moved. They slept. A deep, exhausted sleep. They woke, and he would feed her a piece of hardtack, or give her water, and they would sleep again. They just held each other, their bodies pressed together, a silent, shared healing. They let the silence and the closeness knit back together what the violence had tried to tear apart. The 2 days of silence bled into a week. The fire burned the ash of her old life, and the wind scattered it. The bloodstains were gone, the porch boards replaced by paler, newer wood. Eli had buried the dead, and the mountain had reclaimed its quiet. But it was a heavy quiet. They moved around each other, speaking in necessities. "Coffee's hot. Need more water." The fight had bound them in blood, but the aftermath had left them raw, uncertain. The intimacy they had found was bruised. Then, true spring arrived. It came not as a drip, but as a flood. The last of the snow vanished from the slopes, chased away by a warm wind that smelled of pine sap and damp soil. The small creek beside the cabin, which had been a frozen trickle, became a roaring, white water rush. Life, which had been holding its breath under the ice, exploded. Patches of Indian paintbrush flared scarlet against the rocks, the aspens, which had been bare. Skeletal sticks suddenly shimmered with new leaves, a green so pale and bright it hurt the eyes. Eli stood on the new porch, staring at the high ridge to the west. "It's time," he said. Clara, who was washing a skillet, looked up. "Time for what?" "To see." He packed a canteen and a pouch of jerky. He did not ask her to come. He simply waited by the door until she had wiped her hands and pulled on the sturdy boots he had mended for her. The hike was brutal. It was not a trail, but a climb. He led her up a game path, through thickets of alder that tore at their clothes, and across steep shoulders of loose rock. Her legs, strong from chopping wood, burned with the effort. Her lungs ached in the thin air. Several times, she slipped, her boots finding no purchase. He would reach back, his scarred hand closing around her arm, and haul her up without a word. He did not slow for her. He expected her to keep up, and she did. She set her jaw, tasting the salt of her own sweat, and matched his pace. The girl who had collapsed in the snow was gone. This woman climbed. After 2 hours, they reached the summit. It was not a peak, but a long, flat ridge of granite, windswept and bare. Eli walked to the edge and waited. Clara came to stand beside him. She was breathing hard, her hair plastered to her face. She looked down, and the breath she had left was stolen from her. The valley. She had never seen it. From the cabin, she could see only the opposing slope, the trees, the sky. From here, she could see everything. It was a vast green bowl, cradled by the snow-capped peaks of the Laramie Range, a river, a ribbon of pure silver, cut through the center. Miles below, she could see meadows, so green they looked like paint, dotted with herds of elk, tiny specks moving in the sun. An eagle drifted on the wind, far below them, its shadow sweeping across the land. It was not the small, hard world of the cabin. It was a world so big, so clean, so full of life, it was overwhelming. She had not known a place like this could exist. Her world had been kitchens and root cellars, and the 4 walls of her uncle's tyranny. She sank to her knees on the warm rock. She had not wept when Silas threatened her. She had not wept when the men died, but she wept now. The beauty was a physical pain, a clean fire that burned out the last of the fear, the last of the filth. She cried for the sheer, terrible, and beautiful fact of being alive to see it. Eli stood beside her. He did not touch her. He just stood guard, his gaze on the horizon, letting her have the moment. When her sobs quieted, she looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "I want this," she whispered, her voice rough. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "The valley?" "No," she said. She stood, wiping her face with her sleeve. She felt scoured clean, inside and out. "I want this. I want to know this. I want to be able to stand up here, alone, and not be afraid. I want to know what you know. How to live, not just stay alive, how to live like this." She gestured to the mountains, the wind, the sky. "Teach me, Eli. Teach me how to be, like you, unafraid." Eli looked at her for a long time. He saw the fire in her, the steel he had only glimpsed before. It was fully forged now. "Unafraid ain't possible," he said, his voice quiet. "Even the wolves are afraid. Smart is what you mean. Smart is what keeps you alive." He turned and started back down the slope. "Come on. You want to learn? School's started. First lesson. Stop staring and watch where you put your feet. A fall up here will kill you faster than a bullet." She scrambled after him, a small, fierce smile touching her lips. He was a hard teacher. He taught her the way the mountains had taught him, without sentiment, with high stakes. He taught her how to hunt, not just how to shoot, how to walk for an hour and make no sound, placing her feet heel to toe. He taught her to read the story of the ground, the scuff of a deer's hoof, the print of a coyote, the fresh, clawed-up earth that meant a bear was foraging. He taught her to read the wind. "Never walk with it at your back," he'd say, crumbling dry dirt in his hand, letting the dust show the current. "You're just sending them a letter, telling them you're coming to dinner." She learned to use the knife. Skinning was part of it, but so was butchering. How to break down a deer, wasting nothing. The hide for leather, the sinew for thread, the meat for jerky, the bones for broth. It was hard, bloody work, but it was honest. It was life. She learned the plants. This, he said, pulling a sprig of yarrow. Chew it and put it on a cut. It'll stop the bleeding. This, a sprig of willow bark. Boil it for a fever. And this, a pretty white flower. Is death camas, looks like wild onion, kills you in an hour. You pay attention to the difference. She learned. She soaked up the knowledge, her mind a dry sponge. She grew lean, her skin turning brown from the sun. The fear did not leave, just as he'd said. But it changed. It was no longer the cowering dread of a fist. It was a sharp, clear-eyed respect for the world, for its dangers and its gifts. They moved together, a team. They hunted as partners. She was quiet, a shadow at his back. He would spot the game. She would circle, moving through the trees, pushing the animal toward him. One day, she took the shot. A young buck. It was a clean kill. She had not closed her eyes. She had not flinched. She had just breathed out and squeezed. They built a second shelter, a small spike camp high up in a basin, a place to stay overnight when the hunt took them far. It was just a three-sided lean-to, but they built it together. She notched the logs while he set the frame. They laughed when she dropped a heavy roof beam, and the sound of her laughter, open and free, startled them both. She had not known her own voice could make that sound. She smiled more. It was a slow, shy thing, but when it came, it lit her face, chasing the last of the shadows from her eyes. She was not just surviving. She was living. The day came when the flour sack was empty and the salt was gone. Eli looked at the empty containers, his jaw tight. "We have to go down," he said. "To the outpost." Clara tensed. "Silas." "The outpost is south," Eli said. "Your uncle was from the north, and Jed's a gossip, but he's not stupid. He won't have told anyone where I live. Still, it's a risk." "I'm not staying here, hiding," she said. "Good, but you can't go as Clara." He took his skinning knife. "Turn around." She sat on the stump, her heart hammering. "What are you doing?" "A boy can ride with a trapper and no one looks twice. A woman draws eyes." She closed her eyes and nodded. She felt the cold steel of the knife, heard the snick as he gathered her long, dark hair. He was not gentle, but he was quick. The heavy weight of it fell away, locks of it pooling on the floor. She felt suddenly lighter, stripped. He handed her a pair of his old denim trousers, worn soft and held up with a piece of cordage. He gave her a loose shirt and his spare hat, a shapeless felt thing that, when she pulled it on, shadowed her face completely. She looked at her reflection in the water bucket. A thin, wide-eyed boy stared back. "It'll do," Eli said, his voice rough. They rode his one mule, the steady, patient animal he'd had for years. He walked, his rifle in his hand, and she rode. It took all day to get down the mountain, the world growing warmer, dustier, as they descended. The trading outpost was not a town. It was 2 log buildings and a collection of corrals, huddled by a bend in the river. It smelled of wood smoke, manure, and whiskey. A few trappers lounged on the porch. A couple of Shoshone women sat in the shade, their beadwork laid out on a blanket. Clara's hand went to the knife on her belt. Eli had given her his. Her nerves were screaming. Eli put a hand on her knee. "Easy," he murmured. "Walk like you're tired. Don't talk. Let me do it." He hitched the mule. The men on the porch nodded to him. "Boone." "Gents," he replied. He and Clara, the boy, went inside. The post was dark, crowded, and smelled of tobacco, cured hides, and spices. The trader, a man named Matthias, looked up. "Eli, been a while. Thought the big snow might have got you." "It tried," Eli said. He handed over a stack of prime beaver pelts. "Need flour, salt, coffee, and shot. Number 6, if you have it." As Matthias weighed the pelts, his eyes slid to Clara. She was standing by the door, her shoulders slumped. her hat pulled low, trying to look like nothing. "New helper?" Matthias asked. Eli didn't hesitate. He looked over at Clara, his gaze soft for just a second. "My wife," he said. Clara's head snapped up. Her heart stopped. Wife. He had said it in public. The word was a brand, a shield. Matthias raised an eyebrow. He'd known Eli for 10 years, known him as a solitary man. He looked at the small, disguised figure. "Well," he said, deciding not to pry. "Congratulations." They gathered their supplies. As they were leaving, an older woman, one of the Shoshone, rose from her blanket and stepped into Clara's path. She was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes black and bright. She looked at Clara, not at the disguise, but at her. Clara froze. The woman reached out a single, bony finger and touched Clara's cheek, just for a second. "You," the woman said, her voice like dry leaves. "You have been in the dark. Now, you look like someone who's finally been chosen." Clara did not know what to say. The woman smiled, a small, toothless expression, and stepped back. Eli grabbed Clara's arm, his grip tight. "Time to go." They packed the mule and left, not waiting for the sun to set. They climbed into the twilight, pushing hard, wanting the safety of the high country. They arrived back at the cabin well after midnight, exhausted but safe, the mule laden with supplies. They had done it. They had faced the world, and won. "Wife?" Clara asked as he unbarred the door. He didn't look at her. He lit the lantern. "Seemed simpler," he grunted. She came up behind him in the dark. "Eli." He turned. "Thank you," she said. She meant for the flower. She meant for the word. She meant for everything. He just nodded. He put his hand on her head, where her hair was short and bristly. He stroked it, a gesture of deep, quiet affection. "Go to sleep. You're safe." They were safe for 3 days. It happened in the morning. Clara was outside, checking the snare line she had set. Eli was inside, cleaning his rifle. She heard the horses first, more than one, and the jingle of tack. She straightened, her hand on her knife. They were not trying to be quiet. 3 men rode into the clearing. One was Silas. His face was a mask of triumph. He was clean, almost respectable, and he was not drunk. Beside him was a man with a tin star on his vest, a heavy pistol on his hip, and the coldest eyes Clara had ever seen. The third man was a hired gun, his face blank. Eli was on the porch in a second, his rifle in his hand, but not aimed. "That's him!" Silas shouted, pointing at Eli. "That's the man! Eli Boone! He stole my kin!" "Eli Boone," the deputy said, his voice flat and loud. "I have a warrant here from the territorial judge. Says you're holding an indentured girl by the name of Clara Gable, one who fled her legal guardian." "She's not indentured," Eli said, his voice a low growl. "She's my wife." "Liar!" Silas screamed. "He's a liar. She's my niece. She's my property until she's wed, and he stole her. He's a kidnapper and a murderer. He killed 2 men who came with me to get her back." "They were armed." Eli said, "They fired first. It was self-defense." "So you admit it," the deputy said, his hand moving to his pistol. "You killed Frank Pate and Orrin Spence." He unrolled a piece of paper. "This here is a writ, signed by Judge Miller. It says Clara Gable is to be returned to her uncle, Silas Gable, and you are to be arrested for murder." He held up a second paper. "And this one," he sneered, "is a forged bill of sale for an indentured girl. He says you bought her." "He's lying," Clara cried, stepping forward. "He tried to sell me. He beat me. Look at me. Am I a runaway, or did I run for my life?" The deputy looked at her short hair, her men's trousers, her sun-darkened skin. He looked at her with pure, cold contempt. You look like a whore who's been living in the woods with a killer. You'll come to town and you'll tell your story to the judge. Now, Boone, put the rifle down. Easy." "She's not going with him," Eli said. He raised the rifle. Just an inch. It was all the deputy needed. "Resisting!" he yelled. He was fast. His pistol was out and fired before Eli could get his own gun level. The shot was not aimed to kill. It was aimed to cripple. The bullet hit Eli in the thigh, in the same leg that had always been bad. He roared, a sound of pure rage and pain, and crumpled to his knees, his rifle clattering on the porch. "No!" Clara screamed. She ran for Eli, but the third man, the hired gun, spurred his horse and cut her off, grabbing her arm, his fingers biting deep. He dragged her, kicking and scratching, toward Silas. "Eli!" she shrieked. Eli was on the ground, trying to push himself up, blood pouring from his leg. The deputy strode onto the porch, his pistol still smoking. He raised it high and brought the heavy barrel down on the side of Eli's head. There was a sickening thud. Eli went limp, his face hitting the new porch boards. A terrible, ringing silence fell. Clara stopped struggling. She just stared. He was not moving. A pool of dark blood was spreading from his head. "You killed him," she whispered. The world went gray at the edges. You killed him." "He ain't dead," the deputy grunted, wiping his pistol on his pants. "Yet, but he'll stand trial, if he lives." "Get her," Silas hissed, his eyes glinting. "Get the little bitch." The hired man tied her hands, the rope biting deep into her wrists. They threw her onto the back of the third horse, her stomach down, and tied her feet. "Burn it," Silas said. "Burn the whole damn place." "No," the deputy said. "We're not arsonists. We're the law. We have what we came for." They rode away. Clara, bounced and choked with dust, watched the cabin get smaller. She watched the dark, unmoving shape on the porch, the man who had taught her to live, until he was just a speck, and then he was gone. The journey to town was a blur of misery. They rode for hours. Down the mountains she had climbed with such joy. She was taken to a small, dusty town, a single street with a sheriff's office. She was not put in a cell. She was put in a holding room in the back, a filthy, windowless closet that smelled of urine and despair. The deputy shoved her in. "The judge will be here in 2 days," he said. "Till then, you sit and think on your sins." He slammed the door. The bolt slid home. She was alone, in the dark. Her hands were still tied. She slid down the rough wall to the floor. He was dead. He had to be. That blow, the blood, no one could survive that. She had been free. She had been a wife. She had been a hunter. She had been chosen. Now, she was nothing. She was property. She was a used-up whore. She was a girl in a dark room, waiting for her uncle to come and claim her. All her old fears, the ones she thought she had burned, came rushing back. They were cold, and they were real. Her body was a thing to be used. Her words were ignored. Her fate, which she had dared to think was her own, was sealed. Silas had won. He woke to the smell of his own blood. For a moment, Eli Boone was not in his cabin. He was back in the gully, shot in the side, his fingers mangled, waiting to die. The coppery taste was the same. The throbbing pain was the same. Then he opened his eyes. The world was blurry, tilting. He was on his face, on his own porch. Clara. The name was a thunderclap in his skull. He pushed himself up, a roar of pain tearing from his throat. His head felt like it had been split by an axe. He touched his temple, and his fingers came away sticky and black with dried blood. The deputy had pistol-whipped him. His leg. He looked down. His left thigh was soaked. The bullet had gone clean through, but it had torn the muscle. It was the same leg, the one that always failed him. "Clara!" he yelled. His voice was a dry croak. The cabin was silent. He crawled, dragging his useless leg, over the threshold. The cabin was empty. Her apron was on the floor. The bread she had been kneading was a dry, cracked lump in the bowl. They had taken her. A rage, colder and cleaner than any fire, burned through the pain. He was not a man to die easily. He had survived the war. He had survived the betrayal. He would not be killed by a tin-star bully and a pig like Silas. He dragged himself to the water barrel. He washed the wound on his head. It was a deep gash, but the bleeding had slowed. He tore a strip from a clean flour sack and bound it tight, the pressure making him grunt. The leg was worse. He cut his trouser leg away. He knew this kind of wound. It needed packing. He looked at the shelf where she kept the herbs. The yarrow. She had learned the lesson. He grabbed a handful of the dried yarrow, crammed it into the entry and exit wounds, and then wrapped the entire thigh with another long strip of the sack. He bound it so tight his foot went numb. He didn't care. It would hold. He found his spare pistol, the one he kept under his cot. He found a box of cartridges. He crawled to the door, using the frame to haul his body upright. He stood, his weight on his good leg, the world spinning. The mule. They had left the mule. They had been so confident in their victory, so sure he was dead or dying. They hadn't bothered to take his only transport. He limped to the animal, his vision graying at the edges. He slumped over its back, not even trying to use the saddle. He grabbed a fistful of mane. "Get up," he hissed. To the mule, or to himself. "Get up!" The ride to town was a nightmare. It was hours of agony. Every jolt of the mule sent fire up his leg and made his head slam with pain. He passed out twice, slumping forward, only to be woken by the mule stopping on the trail. He held on, driven by a single, burning thought. Not cages. I'm not leaving her in a cage. He arrived well after midnight. The town was dead. Not a single light burned in any window. It was a dark, dry, cold night, the moon just a sliver. He slid off the mule in the alley behind the livery, his bad leg collapsing. He lay in the dust for a minute, breathing, gathering himself. He was a ghost. He had been a scout. He knew how to move in the dark. He found the sheriff's office. It was a small, false front building, dark as the rest. He limped to the side, peering through the window. A single lamp was turned down low on the desk, casting just enough light to see the empty chairs. In the back, there was a single, heavy door. The cell. He tried the front. Locked. He went to the back door. Locked. He pulled the heavy skinning knife from his belt. He did not bother with the lock. He was past subtlety. He jammed the knife into the wood of the door frame, right beside the lock plate. He put his shoulder into it and threw his entire, desperate weight forward. The wood splintered. The lock jam tore free. The door crashed open. "In the back closet!" Clara screamed. She had been drifting in a half-sleep of despair, and the sound of the door breaking open was the sound of Silas. Come to claim her. She scrambled into the corner, a small, terrified animal. The door to her cell was barred from the outside. She heard a fumbling, a curse. Then the heavy bar was lifted. The door swung open. A man stood silhouetted in the dim light from the outer office. He was huge, leaning on the doorframe, and he was breathing like a winded bull. She could not see his face, only his shape. "No," she whimpered. "Please, don't." "Clara," he grunted. She stopped breathing. It was not Silas. It was not the deputy. It was a voice she thought she would never hear again. "Eli?" He stumbled into the room, falling against the wall. He was covered in blood. His head was wrapped in a crude, dark-stained bandage. His trouser leg was torn and black with it. "You're alive," she whispered. It was not a question. It was a miracle. She rushed to him, her hands, still tied, fluttering to his face, his chest. "My God, Eli, you're bleeding. Your head, your leg." "Doesn't matter," he rasped. He sawed at the ropes on her wrists with his knife. They fell away. She grabbed him as he started to slide down the wall. "You have to go," she pleaded, her voice desperate, tears starting. "They'll kill you, Eli. They have the law. They have papers. They'll hang you. Please, you're alive. Go north. Just go." She pushed at his chest. "I'm not worth this. I'm not worth your blood." He grabbed her arms. His grip was weak, but his eyes were burning. He held her, his face inches from hers in the dark, his breath hot. "Stop," he hissed. "You stop saying that." He pulled her closer, his voice raw, shaking with pain and a terrible, cold fury. "This is what love looks like," he said. "It's not silence. It's not shame. It's not cages. I am not leaving you in a cage." He kissed her, hard. It was not a tender kiss. It was a desperate, angry promise. It tasted of blood and dust and iron. "Now," he said, pulling away. "Where are the papers? The warrant?" "The deputy, he had them on the desk," she said, her mind catching up to his. He limped to the desk. The papers were there, weighted down by a whiskey bottle. The writ, the forged indenture, the warrant for his arrest. He read them. His face was granite. "Abernathy," he said. "What?" "The clerk. We need the clerk. And the preacher." He grabbed her hand. "Come on." "Eli, you can't walk." "Watch me," he growled. The preacher, Reverend Gideon, was a small, stern man who feared God and nothing else. He opened his door in his nightshirt, a shotgun in his hands. He saw Eli Boone, bloody and leaning on a girl, and his face hardened. "Boone, you're a wanted man. I should call the deputy." "You should," Eli agreed, pushing past him into the small house. "But first, you're going to listen. You're a man of God. I want to know if God's law agrees with a man selling his niece into whoring to pay a gambling debt." Gideon lowered the shotgun. He looked at Clara. He saw the bruises on her wrists from the ropes, the terror in her eyes. "Speak," he said. "They woke the clerk, Mr. Abernathy." Next, Abernathy was a man of books and laws. He was terrified of the deputy, but, as Eli had gambled, he was more terrified of a forged document. "This is a territorial writ," Abernathy said, his hands shaking as he held the paper Eli had taken. "It's signed by Judge Miller." "The writ is based on that," Eli said, pointing to the indenture paper. "Which is a lie. I'm telling you, as a man, that Clara Gable is his niece, not his property. He has no indenture, he's a fraud, and that deputy is bought." Abernathy looked torn. "But the judge's signature." "Is the judge in town?" Eli demanded. "No, he's not due for a month." "Then the law, right now, is that deputy, and he's working for Silas." Eli leaned forward, his bloody face a mask of terrible intensity. "Are you going to let a man use a forged paper to steal a woman in your town? You're the clerk. Your records are the law here. Check them. Check the territorial census. See if Silas Gable ever filed an indenture. See who Clara Gable's parents were." Abernathy, spurred by the offense to his profession, lit a lamp and went to his office. The three of them waited. Reverend Gideon looked at Clara. "Is it true, child, what he said about your uncle?" Clara, who had been hiding behind Eli, stepped forward. Her voice was quiet. "It's true. He beat me. He was giving me to a man named Grissom to pay a debt of $200. When I ran, he came to the cabin. He brought 2 men. They shot first. Eli. Eli just defended our home." Abernathy came back, his face pale. "He's right," the clerk whispered. "There is no indenture on file. There's no record of it anywhere. According to the census, Clara Gable is the daughter of Martin and Sarah Gable, both deceased. She's his ward, not his slave." Reverend Gideon's face went grim. "The deputy has been party to a fraud, a kidnapping. He has the guns." Eli said, We have the truth. It's not enough. Not in a town like this. It will be, Gideon said. He pulled his coat on over his nightshirt. In my church, it will be. Morning came. The town woke to a strange sight. Reverend Gideon standing on the steps of his small white church, ringing the bell. He rang it not for service, but for an alarm, a gathering. People came, curious. The blacksmith, the livery owner, the saloon keeper, the trader, Jed, was in town. And he came. The women of the town, curious and wary, gathered at the back. Then the deputy, whose name was Harlan, appeared. He was furious. "What's this, preacher? You've got no call to—" "I have every call," Gideon said, his voice booming in the quiet morning. "There has been a crime committed, and we, the people of this town, are going to hear it." "This is my town," Harlan spat. "This is God's town," Gideon retorted. "And this is his house. All are welcome, and all will be heard." Silas was with him, a smirk on his face. He saw Eli leaning on the church wall, pale and bloody, and his smirk widened. "Well, look, the murderer came back." "He's my prisoner," Harlan shouted, drawing his pistol. "He is in sanctuary," Gideon roared, holding up his Bible. "You will not draw a weapon on holy ground, deputy, or you will answer to me, and to him." Harlan hesitated. He had the law, but the preacher had the town's soul. He holstered his pistol, his eyes full of hate. "Fine, let him talk. Let the whore talk. Then I'm hanging him." The townsfolk, divided, filed into the church. Some sat on Silas's side, seeing a dirty mountain man who had stolen a girl. Others, particularly the women and Jed, who looked troubled, sat on the other. Clara and Eli sat in the front pew. "Clara Gable," Gideon said, his voice echoing. "You have been accused of theft, and this man, Eli Boone, of murder." "He's a liar," Silas yelled. "She's indentured. She's mine. That paper proves it." "The paper proves a claim." "Mr. Abernathy said, standing up, his voice shaking but clear. "A claim for which I can find no public record." The crowd murmured. "She's a liar," Silas pointed a thick finger at Clara. "A runaway, a whore. Look at her, dressed like a boy, living in sin with that animal." "Clara," Gideon said, his voice softening, "you will stand. You will face these people, and you will tell the truth." Clara stood. Her legs felt weak. The whole town was staring at her. She saw the contempt in their eyes. She saw the judgment. She looked at Silas, his face red with hate. She felt the old, cold fear. She was nothing. She was property. Then she looked at Eli. He was watching her. He was pale, sweating from the pain, his legs stiff and straight in front of him, but his eyes were clear. He was not afraid. He was not ashamed. He was just waiting. He had given her the choice. He had given her the gun. Now, he was giving her this. She turned to the crowd. She did not speak to Silas. She spoke to them. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it did not tremble. "My name is Clara Gable. My uncle is Silas Gable. He did not raise me. He fed me, and he beat me." A woman in the back gasped. "He told me I was a burden. He told me I was useless. For 10 years. He told me that." She took a breath. 2 months ago, a man named Grissom came. My uncle owed him money, $200, my uncle. He told me I was the payment, that I would marry him. He was a drunk, and he looked at me. She paused. I ran into the snow. I did not steal anything. I took a piece of bread and a paring knife. I ran until I felt I was dying." She turned and looked at Eli. "This man, Eli Boone, he found me. He saved my life. He took me in. He fed me. He wrapped my feet. He did not. He did not touch me. He asked for nothing. He gave me a home. He kept me safe." "He's a killer!" Silas screamed. "He is a good man." Clara's voice rose, sharp and clear. "You came to the cabin. You came with 2 hired guns. You threatened to burn us out. You shot at us. We shot back. We defended our home. And when your men were down, you ran. You ran like a coward and left them to die in the snow." The crowd was silent. Jed, the traitor, stood up. That's true. Preacher, Silas came to me. He was asking about her. He had 2 hard men with him. They weren't law." "This is a lie," Silas raged. "She's a whore. She slept with him. She's ruined." Clara looked at her uncle, the man who had haunted her every dream, and she felt nothing. The fear was gone. "Yes," she said, "I love him. He is my husband in the eyes of God, and I am not ruined. I am free." The church was stunned. Harlan, the deputy, saw he was losing. "The paper!" he yelled. "The paper is the law. She is his property." Eli stood, groaning as he put weight on his wounded leg. He limped to the front, standing beside Clara. He looked at her, not at the crowd. "Clara," he said, his voice low. "For her, the law down here is messy. It's words on paper that men like him can twist. We can fight this or we can leave." He gestured to the door. "We can go north, right now. We can ride, and we will never stop. No one will find us, but we'll be running forever." He looked at the cabin they had built, at the life they had started. "Or," he said, "we can stay, and we can claim the life we'd built, right here, in the light." He held out his hand, the one with the missing fingers. "It's your choice, not mine, not his, yours." This was the moment. The entire town held its breath. Silas was smiling, a cruel, knowing smile. He knew she was a coward. She would run. Clara looked at her uncle's smiling, hateful face. She looked at the deputy, a man who would sell a woman for a few dollars. She looked at the town, at their judging, curious eyes. Then she looked at Eli. He was bleeding for her. He was willing to run for her, and he was willing to die for her. She said the words she had said to him on the mountain. "I'm tired of running." She stepped forward. She walked past Silas, who looked shocked. She walked past the deputy. She stood in the aisle, in front of the whole town. And she took Eli Boone's scarred hand in her own. She chose him, publicly, fearlessly. The town gasped. A woman in the back began to weep. Reverend Gideon stepped forward, his face like thunder. He raised his hand. "This woman has made her choice. She is not property. She is not a slave. She is a child of God, and she is free. Deputy, your warrant is based on a fraud. Mr. Abernathy has proven it. This man, Silas Gable, is a liar and a kidnapper. I suggest you and he leave this town, now, before the good people here decide that your law is not the one they wish to follow." The crowd stood. The blacksmith, the liveryman, Jed, they stood with Eli and Clara. Harlan looked at the faces. He was not a deputy. He was a bully, and a bully always folds. He grabbed Silas by the arm. "It's done," he hissed. "Let's go." Silas, his face purple, tried to pull away, but the deputy dragged him out of the church. Clara and Eli stood, their hands locked together. The townspeople parted for them. They walked, Eli limping heavily, Clara supporting him, out of the church, out of the dark, and into the bright, clean sunlight. Months passed. The mountain healed. The cabin was rebuilt. Eli's leg healed. The limp worse now, a permanent part of him, but he was steady. They had a real glass window now, but with a season's worth of trapping. The snow was falling again, the first deep snow of the new winter. But inside, the cabin was warm. A fire crackled. Stew bubbled in the pot. Clara was mending one of Eli's shirts, her stitches small and even. She felt him watching her. She looked up. He was sitting on his stump, carving, but his eyes were on her. She put the shirt down. She felt a warmth in her chest, a deep, quiet peace that was still so new. It felt strange. "Eli," she said softly. He looked up. She hesitated, trying to find the words. "I still don't know how to be loved." He looked at her, and a small, rare smile touched his lips. Crinkling the corners of his eyes, he set his carving down. He stood, his limp pronounced in the small space, and came to her. He knelt in front of her, his knees cracking. He took her hands, the ones holding the needle and thread. "You're learning," he said, his voice rough. He kissed her palms. "And I'm not done showing you." He stood and walked to the small chest where he kept his things. He pulled out a worn, leather-bound book, the cabin log. He opened it on the table. It was filled with his rough scrawl. Dates, weather, pelts. He dipped the pen in the ink bottle and held it out to her. She looked at him, confused. "Make it right," he said. "Put your mark on it, on this place." Clara took the pen. Her hand was steady. She looked at the clean, empty page, the start of a new season. She thought of the girl who had run, the girl who had been property. She was gone. She put the pen to the paper. For the first time, she did not write Clara Gable. She wrote, in clear, strong letters, Clara Boone. "Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please leave a comment and let us know. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this. And finally, if you enjoyed the journey of Clara and Eli, please share your thoughts in English. We read every comment.